Someone asked me the other day about some new theological idea they'd read in something I'd written. And I replied that I hoped it wasn't too new because most the new theological ideas turn out to be old heresies revisited. And that's why we keep coming back to Scripture, to test our ideas, to check on how we're going in our understanding of who God is, who we are in relationship with God, and what our Christian life should be like. And when it comes to the last of those things, what our Christian life should be like, the book of James is one of the most practical handbooks we have in the Bible. Now, traditionally, the James who wrote this letter was thought to be Jesus's brother or half-brother or step-brother, depending what you think. And of course, that means he was a Jew. So I want to start thinking about this by openly borrowing some wisdom from an amazing Jewish person who died recently, the wonderful Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. When he spoke to Lambeth Conference in 2018, he started by telling a story about imagining walking around central London with his granddaughter. Apparently, a group of religious leaders had done this walk recently. And they started at Westminster and imagined his granddaughter saying, "Granddad, what happens here?" And he replied, "Politics happens here." And she said, "What is politics?" And he replied, "It's the creation and distribution of power." And they kept walking and they came to the Bank of England. And she asked, "So, Granddad, what happens here?" And he said, "Economics happens here." So she asked, "What's economics?" And he said, "Economics is the creation and distribution of finances." So they kept walking and they came to St. Paul's Cathedral. And she said, "Granddad, what happens here?" And he replied, "Worship happens here." So she said, "So what does worship create and distribute?" Now, in the talk, he doesn't answer that immediately, but to some extent, perhaps the whole rest of the talk is his answer. And I'll send you a link to it because it's worth reading. But the answer is something which is radically and vitally different to politics or economics. And he says that these politics and economics are the two great forces of our day. And both of these are zero-sum games. You've probably heard that phrase, but what it really means is if you give away any power, you have less. And if you give away any money or possessions, then you have less of it. Share money around a group and you don't have as much as you once had. So both of these are foundationally recipes for conflict and for competition. That's just how they are. But here's the thing. The way of the Bible is based on neither politics nor economics, although it obviously has to deal with both. The Bible is based on covenant. And the thing about what makes up covenant is that the more you give, the more you have. So I want to show you how that works out in James. Verses 14 to 16 that we've just heard. "If you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't be boastful and false to the truth. Such wisdom doesn't come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, and devilish. For where there's envy and selfish ambition, there will also be disorder and wickedness of every kind." James doesn't pull any punches, does he? And what he's describing here is essentially a struggle for power. Envy because someone else has influence or position that we don't have. Selfish ambition, wanting to get ahead, to claim power for ourselves at the expense of others. So this is the kind of checklist for us. When we get angry or we find ourselves caught up in conflict, is it because we're feeling envious? Is it because our own ambition is being thwarted? Is it that we're seeking power for ourselves and we're resenting it being taken away? That's the way of politics. And then look at the next bit of James. Those conflicts and disputes among you, where do they come from? Don't they come from your cravings that are at war within you? You want something and you don't have it, so you commit murder. And you covet something and can't obtain it, so you engage in disputes and conflicts. So here we move from the struggle for power to the struggle for possessions, which is the sin of covetousness. You've got something and I think I've got a right to it. We have this fear that somehow you having something means that I'm missing out. Just for one little example, try suggesting to any parish that it works closely with another. And this is what comes up immediately. What am I going to lose? Will they take my money? There's a checklist, again, that we can use individually and as faith communities. Are we angry because we are scared of what we're going to lose in terms of finances or possessions? Are we driven by the struggle for possessions? Because that's the way of economics. And the things James directs us towards are very different. The wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace. He's talking about relational qualities, covenant qualities. Now, none of this means that we have to be passive and silent. If we're going to have peace, that means speaking and working for justice. But we're driven by a desire for peace, not for the incentives of power or money. And as he says, if we sow peace, then we don't reap emptiness or loss. We reap righteousness and peace. Now, this way of framing the whole kind of foundational incentive and drive for our life is incredibly countercultural, and it's so needed today. Because the way of politics and economics is the air we breathe, we have to examine ourselves individually and as a church carefully and honestly and regularly, or we're going to automatically fall into the way of thinking that it's all about power and money. That church growth or our individual success is measured by how important we are, or how admired we are, or affirmed, or well off. A covenant way, the way of Jesus, couldn't be more different. And that can be difficult because all those things are attractive. That's what we've been taught to admire. But success for Jesus, we can't get away from it. Success for Jesus was servanthood, was self-giving love, was bringing good news, not to the influential and the important and the attractive, but the despised and unattractive. Success for James, brought up by the same father and well, not the same father, the same mother as Jesus, was purity, gentleness, humility, authenticity, and peacemaking. Which sounds great, but it's hard. So how do we do it? How do we absorb and become such examples and living icons of this way of being, that we will be different to the world around us? And I think the only answer is faith, which could equally be translated trust. Trust that God's leading us, that however things look, we're in God's hands. Trust that even if we have no power, God does. That even if things look rough, living or dying, we belong to the God who is love. And what can be even harder, trust in each other. Trusting each other that we are all actually trying our darndest trying our best to be followers of Jesus, learning to be slow to leap to negative assumptions about each other, learning the way of peace and gentleness. And truly, this is a thing of immense hope. We've tried for generations now to attract people to our faith from the wider society by fitting in with them. And maybe now it's time that we tried instead to be who Jesus told us to be, a people who are radically countercultural, a people who are not driven by politics or economics, by a covenant of faithful love.